Compatibility Matrix has been one of our very big investments recently, and we're seeing a ton of great feedback from customers, prospects, folks that even decided not to use Replicated years ago. And Josh is one of the core engineers on that product, building a lot of it. So he's going to kind of give you an overview of what it is, and then talk about some of the updates that have happened recently. This is a product that's under very, very active development, still in kind of a beta phase. And because of that, I will tell you that we are giving away lots of free credits. So if you want to try out this compatibility matrix after you kind of see this and you want to dig in, we'll happily load your account up with a couple $100 worth of credits. That's enough to do tons of testing and play around and integrate this into your CI. And for the next month or so, I don't think we're going to be charging anybody. And this is all like real infrastructure under the hood that you're getting access to. So we're eating the cost on that to give you a chance to really dig in. So Josh, why don't you take it away?
Cool. Thanks, Grant. So quick recap, what is Compatibility Matrix? It's new from our side, and what it does is it allows you in a programmatic way spin up Kubernetes distributions and versions in a lightning fast way. Yeah, super fast in terms of seconds and minutes, which makes that if you have your application as a vendor and you're shipping your application to one of your customers, what you can do now is if your customer is running a certain Kubernetes distribution, using Compatibility Matrix, you can actually test and validate your application that it works in that customer environment. So you can actually really say, oh, let's spin up that EKS cluster, same version as the customer is using, deploy your application and do your tests on there, yeah, which is really awesome. Yeah. What are we adding? We are increasingly adding new Kubernetes distributions and versions. In the last RepliCon, we had 3 Kubernetes distributions that we supported, EKS, Kind, and K3S. I think we're now at 7, if I'm not wrong, on there. So now 7 different distributions, and we're continuously adding those. Next, what you can do is you can specify TTLs, time to live. So the cluster that you're running, you specify how long you want that cluster to be running. Let's say 1 hour, 2 hours, or even 30 minutes. In there, you do your testing, and once it expires, the cluster will be removed for you, which also makes that you are only going to be billed for the time that you're using that cluster. Anyone who has ever created, let's say, an EKS cluster or an OpenShift cluster by themselves knows that it can take easily like 15 or more minutes to create such a cluster. In our case, you're only billed for the time that you're actually using that cluster until it is being removed again. Yeah. So what I want to show you is one thing that we added also is it's now possible to create such a cluster from the vendor portal UI. Yeah. So you can go into the vendor portal. There is this whole compatibility matrix in here. You can see like I have a certain amount of credits. This is what Grant just talked about. Like if you're interested, let us know. We can actually set you up and get you going very easily in here. But I can come in here and can say I can create a cluster. So this is my RepliCon demo cluster that I want to create. Let's pick K3S, and then you can already see there are a couple of options here. Yeah, one of them is, for example, the instance types. I can specify how many CPUs or how much memory I want for that cluster. Yeah. These are what we call replicated instance types. Those are also documented on the doc side, what those mean. So they're balanced in terms of like 4 CPUs and then 16 gigs of memory and so on. Yeah. I can specify the Kubernetes version, how long I want that cluster to be around, and what's the size of the disk that I want for that K3S cluster. So if I click Create Cluster here, this is going to start provisioning my cluster. It's going to start creating that K3S cluster. And I just have to hit refresh here. And here you can now see that my demo cluster is being prepared. And once it's running, an hour later, it will automatically be removed. Once it's running, I can also have access to, and then I can have access to the kubeconfig. So then I can start interacting with my typical kubectl commands in there. So What clusters do we support? There are two types of clusters. On one hand, we have VM-based clusters. Those are hosted on our bare metal servers in there. As I mentioned already, and I've shown you in the vendor portal, you can configure like CPU, memory, disk from within the vendor portal. And the supported distributions there are now Kind and K3S, which we already did, but we added also OpenShift, curl, and Helm VM. Yeah. Helm VM, I think Mark is going to talk about next. Curl is obvious, that's replicated Kubernetes distribution in there. And then OpenShift is also like where we get a lot of feedback and a lot of requests from. Yeah. The versions, there is new versions that have been added. We're trying to keep things up to date. Like you can see 128 Kubernetes distribution already in here, which is for the Kind distribution. So we're trying to keep that up to date with what is being released by those distributions itself. And then obviously we want to keep improving. Yeah, so one thing we want to do is like add new distributions. So we're very eager to hear all of your feedback on which distributions you want, which versions you want, what kind of features you want, how you want to test this. So feel free to reach out because we're very eager to do all of this. One thing that I didn't mention yet is in terms of curl. Curl is the first distribution also where we support upgrades. So if you spin up a curl cluster, you will be able to upgrade that cluster to a new version of the curl specification. For the cloud-based ones, so those are the AWSs, the Azures in there, the major cloud providers. We support all the major cloud providers already, EKS, GKE, and AKS. AKS is in a very early stage. We actually released that this week in there. And we also do all of their corresponding versions. In terms of the machine types that you can support, we do the most common ones. And I do know that recently for EKS, we also started adding machine types that are ARM-based, yeah, which is also a request from one of our customers in there. And very similar to the VM-based ones, very eager to get your feedback on which distributions we should add next or which machine type you want to have supported. We can actually do that fairly quickly in there. There's a small glitch in here. So as I mentioned, new stuff, cluster upgrades for curl clusters. So let's say you have a customer who is running curl version 1.0 of your specification, you want that customer to be upgraded. You can actually test that out already with Compatibility Matrix. There is a whole set of GitHub actions available for all of this. So you don't have to just rely on the replicated CLI or the vendor portal. You can actually integrate all of this in your existing CI/CD workflows already. And very recent, it is also possible to report back your compatibility results. So as part of your application and you make a release of that application, you can report the result back to the vendor portal that, for example, you're compatible with EKS 127 in there. Let's dive in a little bit. Let's show you what it looks like from a command line perspective. If I go here to my CLI, and I do replicated cluster ls, then you can see like this is, maybe I'm a wrong one. It's kind of strange. I was not expecting this, but let's see. What I want to show first is I want to show you what the prepare command looks like. Yeah, so replicated cluster prepare. There we go. And I'm going to show you the help. What replicated cluster prepare does is it creates that Kubernetes cluster for you, but it also immediately deploys the application onto that cluster. Yeah. If you have pre-flight checks enabled to validate that your application can be installed, those pre-flight checks are going to be run before the installation happens. If you have status informers of your application to see if your application is up and running, we're going to check those status informers. Yeah. And we do this for if you do a Helm-based install or if you have a COTS install. So you can actually specify, if you have a Helm-based, you can specify the location of your chart. If you have a code-based install, you can specify the location of your YAML files in there. So if I kick this off, and I do chart, and I take this one. So in this case, I'm taking my Helm chart, going to spin it up on an EKS cluster for version 127, and my TTL is 30 minutes. Yeah. So I just started this, and this is, of course, taking a while, but you might already imagine that I'm spinning up an EKS cluster, and my TTL is 30 minutes. You might wonder, like, how is he doing that? Well, we can spin up EKS clusters in around 2 minutes. I heard yesterday numbers about 1 minute and 55 seconds to 2 minutes and 15 seconds, which is, again, lightning fast in there. So what happened here is, by running this command, this took my Helm chart, it created a new release from that Helm chart, which is my sequence number 47. Next, it creates a customer, which is a test customer. You won't see that customer in the vendor portal. It is just purely for testing purposes. And once that customer is created, it's going to start spinning up that EKS cluster, deploy my application, run the status informers, make sure that the application is functioning well, and then it will be able to report that result back. Yeah. While this is running, this takes in total about 3 or 4 minutes. What I want to show you is all the different distributions that we support, and not release, but cluster versions in here. So if I go here, then these are all the different Kubernetes distributions that we are currently supporting. You can see here the early support for AKS. I would call that currently in an alpha stage. We have 127 in there. We are very quickly going to add different versions for AKS also. And we do the default instance types for AKS. Yeah. Oh, I didn't want to select that. EKS, we added ARM-based machine types in there. GKE is also new, the most common versions there and the most common machine types. Next, we have Helm VM. Helm VM is what Mark is going to talk about next in there. So we already support that as part of the compatibility matrix. For K3S, we added patch-based versions. Previously with K3S, you were only able to specify all the way up to the minor version. Now you're able also to specify the patch version in there. In terms of kind, we upgraded to the latest distribution version of kind in there, which also gives us the capability to spin up a 128 cluster. And then we also added curl support. Yeah, so if you have a curl slug, you can actually spin up a curl cluster, and you can also run a curl upgrade on that. Like if I want to show you that, so I can do replicated cluster upgrade. I want to show you the help on that. You can actually specify that you want to upgrade. You specify the ID of the Kubernetes cluster that was created, and you specify the new version of that curl cluster that you want to spin up. Yeah. And then obviously we also have OpenShift in there. I mentioned a couple times we spin these up lightning fast. That is true for the majority of these. 2 of them are an exception so far, which is curl and OpenShift. Those take about between 5 to 10 minutes at this moment. Obviously, we're working on that to make it faster. Yeah, and OpenShift is the first one, which I heard yesterday that it's going to be around 2 minutes. Yeah, so OpenShift, we will be able to give you an OpenShift cluster that is up and running for you to be used to test your application in, so that you can support all of your customers who are running on OpenShift in 2 minutes, which is an amazing thing. Yeah. You can see, like now, going back to my cluster prepare command that I ran here, it actually now was successful in there. If I go back here and check the sequence number, I can see here there's a sequence number 47. So what I can do now is I can report this back, and I can say, well, I do support now EKS cluster for that sequence number, and the version was 127, and I'm going to add the success flag in there. Yeah. This is going to report that back into the vendor portal. So if I now do a replicated release inspect to see like, hey, what does 47 look like? And you're going to see a lot of JSON output here that has to do with the Helm chart. You can now see my compatibility result in here, 127. If it's successful or failed. Yeah. So we're going to start gathering feedback on that also, which allows you to immediately say in an automated way, hey, this is working on those distributions, those versions in there. Obviously, I've done a lot of this through the CLI, but all of this can also be done through like GitHub Actions, which are available. So I just showed like report compatibility result. There is a GitHub action already available to hook that up in your CI/CD workflow. I showed the cluster prepare command. There is a prepare cluster command that you can hook up in your CI/CD workflow to get that going.